My wife said if her ex had chosen her instead of his addictions, they would still be together. But now I have chosen something better than her divorce. I am 38 years old and have been married to my wife Grace, 37, for 14 years. We have known each other since we were teenagers. We practically grew up together. We have two wonderful children, Madison, 13, and Mason, 11, who are the light of our lives. I always thought we had a solid marriage based on trust and mutual love, but something came out this weekend that has made me question everything. Last Friday, Grace and I were invited to a high school alumni reunion. It was an adult-only event, so we left the children with my parents. The atmosphere was lively, with everyone reminiscing about old times and catching up on our lives. As expected, at these types of gatherings, the alcohol flowed freely. Grace and I don't usually drink much, but that night we decided to relax a little. I limited myself to a couple of beers, but I noticed that Grace was drinking more than usual. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just assumed she was enjoying a carefree night, especially because we wouldn't have our children that night, as they would be spending the night with my parents. As the night progressed, the atmosphere became more relaxed, and the conversations grew more personal. At one point, a group of friends started talking about Logan, Grace's ex-boyfriend. Logan and Grace had been a couple during high school and part of university before she and I started dating. I overheard fragments of the conversation. Apparently, Logan had fallen into a spiral of addiction to drugs and alcohol. Some of our friends expressed their concern and regret over what was happening to him. I remembered that this had been precisely the reason Grace had ended things with him so many years ago. Grace and I started dating approximately a year after her breakup with Logan. I always knew of his existence, of course, but it was never a frequent topic of conversation between us. Grace had told me that the relationship was over because of Logan's drug problems, but we hadn't delved much deeper into the subject. I respected her past and assumed that if there was anything important to share, she would tell me. That's when it happened. Grace, visibly affected by alcohol, joined the conversation about Logan. Her voice was louder than usual, and I noticed a tone I had never heard from her before. With a mixture of sadness and bitterness, she said something that chilled my blood, I gave Logan the choice. I told him to choose between drugs or me. He chose drugs. If he had chosen to stay with me, we would probably still be together. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel everyone's eyes alternating between me and Grace. My mind went blank for a moment, trying to process what I had just heard. Had my wife, the woman with whom I have shared the last 16 years of my life, just implied that I was her second choice? I wanted to say something to confront her at that very moment, but I held back. We had all been drinking, and that was not the time or place to have an argument that could change our lives. Besides, a part of me hoped that it was just the alcohol talking and that the next day Grace would realize how inappropriate her comment was and feel sorry about it. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I tried to keep my composure, to continue socializing as if nothing had happened, but Grace's words echoed in my head over and over again. When we finally got home, Grace collapsed in a bed while I stayed up for hours replaying every moment of our relationship, looking for signs I might have missed. The next morning during breakfast, Grace noticed that I was unusually quiet. The children were still at my parents' house, so we were alone. She asked me what was wrong, and I decided it was time to address the issue. Grace, I began trying to stay calm. What you said last night about Logan has made me question our entire relationship. Do you really see me as your second choice? I expected her to immediately deny what she had said, to assure me it was just a stupid comment brought on by the alcohol. But her reaction was completely different from what I expected. Without saying a word, she got up from the table and locked herself in our room. I called her several times, asking her to come out and talk like adults, but I got no answer. The rest of the day passed in silence. Grace only left the room to go to the bathroom or get a drink from the kitchen, avoiding any eye contact with me. That night I decided to sleep on the couch, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I felt we needed space to process what was happening. I hoped that the next day, with a clearer head, we could have an honest conversation about what had happened. I thought maybe she still had a hangover and would finally talk to me. But Sunday came, and the situation didn't improve. Grace continued with her silent treatment, refusing to talk to me beyond the necessary coordination for the children who returned home that afternoon. Madison and Mason noticed something was wrong, but we tried to act normally in front of them. And here I am now, writing this. On Sunday night, after another day of silence and tension, I can't understand why Grace is acting this way. She was the one who made the hurtful comment, and now she refuses to talk to me about it. I feel like I'm being punished for something I didn't do. Part of me wants to yell at her, demand an explanation, but I know that would only make things worse. Another part wants to pretend nothing happened, to go back to our normal routine and bury this incident. But I know I can't do that. Her comment has opened a Pandora's box of insecurities and doubts that I can't simply ignore. Have I really been just a replacement all these years? Our life together, our children, our shared dreams, has all of that just been a plan B for her? And if Logan had quit drugs, would Grace have run back into his arms? I know that 16 years of marriage can't be summed up in a single comment made under the influence of alcohol. I know we've built a life together, that we have 2 children, but I can't shake the feeling that something fundamental in our relationship is broken. I need to know if I'm overreacting. Should I give Grace more time to process what happened? Should I insist on having a conversation, even if she doesn't want to? Or should I start to consider that maybe our relationship isn't as solid as I always thought? Reddit, I need your honest opinion. Am I the bad guy for feeling this way? Am I making a mountain out of a molehill? Or am I right to be concerned about the future of my marriage? It's been almost 5 days since my original post, and I wanted to give you an update on my situation. First, I want to express my gratitude to those who took the time to respond to my post. It has been a difficult week, but your comments have helped me process my emotions and think about the next steps to take. Before I go into the details of what has happened this week, I'd like to address some of the most frequently asked questions and comments I've received. Many of you asked about the nature of Grace and Logan's relationship and how exactly it ended. After much thought, I realized that I really didn't know as many details as I thought I did. Grace and Logan were together for 4 years, from the second year of high school until the second year of college. From what Grace had told me, their relationship was quite intense, as teenage relationships tend to be. Logan's drug problem began during their last year together. At first, according to Grace, it was just recreational, but it gradually escalated to harder drugs. Grace tried to help him for months, even accompanying him to some meetings. But the situation became untenable when Logan began to miss classes and put his academic future at risk. After that fateful conversation that never happened, something changed in Grace. In the first few days after the incident, I already noticed a certain distance, but I tried to convince myself that it was just the time she needed to deal with what she had said. However, as the weeks went by, her behavior became increasingly strange. What started as silence and discomfort now transformed into a series of odd behaviors. Grace started going out more often. Before, our evenings were always spent together as a family, watching movies or having dinner, but now she seemed to be constantly busy. There were several last-minute work meetings and dinners with friends I had never heard of. She also started spending more time on her phone, laughing at messages, or leaving the room to take calls, always with the excuse that it was personal or not important. I tried to believe her, but something in my gut told me there was more. One of the most unsettling moments was when Grace started shopping for new clothes more frequently, something she rarely did. Before, she would wear the same comfortable outfits at work and at home, but now she was investing in dresses and high heels, even when supposedly going for a simple coffee with a friend. When I asked her about the sudden interest in her appearance, she shrugged and said, "Every woman likes to feel beautiful." That could be true, of course, but the timing seemed suspicious. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband who imagines things without evidence. So, for a while, I tried to ignore the signs and focus on our kids and work. But as the distance between us grew, so did my suspicions. Madison and Mason also started noticing that their mom wasn't as present anymore, always busy with something outside the house or absorbed in her phone. One night, something woke me up around 2 in the morning. The room was completely silent, except for the soft sound of typing coming from Grace's side. I slowly turned over and saw her with her back to me, typing on her phone with a serious expression. My curiosity, and perhaps a bit of desperation, made me pay closer attention. She was typing fast, and then in one quick move, she deleted what seemed like a message and put her phone back on the nightstand, turning over to sleep. At that moment, my heart raced. I knew something was happening, and even though I didn't want to invade her privacy, I felt I had to do something. I decided I needed to see what was happening on her phone. I waited until Grace was completely asleep, which didn't take long, and carefully picked up her phone. My heart pounded as I unlocked it. There were several recent messages from an unknown number, no name saved. The conversations were brief and somewhat cryptic, with short phrases and emojis, but one in particular caught my attention. "It was amazing seeing you today. We need to do it again soon. Tomorrow afternoon?" My blood ran cold. What was Grace doing that she needed to repeat, and why tomorrow afternoon? I could hardly believe what I was reading. Even without concrete proof, I'd already suspected something, and this only reinforced my worries. I quietly left the room, trying to process everything. As much as I didn't want to believe it, it seemed like my wife was involved in something that could destroy our marriage. The next day, the routine unfolded as usual. Grace was distracted, probably planning her meeting, and I was determined to find out the truth. She casually mentioned that she had a meeting after lunch and would be back later in the afternoon. With a knot in my stomach, I told her that was fine, trying to sound indifferent. That day, I decided I would follow her. I waited for her to leave the house, put on some discreet clothes, and followed her, keeping a safe distance. Grace drove downtown and parked near a small cafe. My heart raced when I saw her get out of the car and enter the cafe with a smile on her face. Then, a few minutes later, a man appeared. He was tall, with brown hair, and had a calm expression. They greeted each other in a friendly manner and sat at a table in the back of the cafe. I watched everything from a distance, trying to stay calm. I didn't know who he was, but the messages on her phone echoed in my head. "It was amazing seeing you. What else could they be doing?" I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of the car and entered the cafe, trying to act natural as I discreetly approached their table. That's when I realized my mistake. As I got closer, I could hear their conversation better. The man was speaking cautiously, choosing his words carefully, and Grace seemed nervous. Suddenly, the man opened a folder and showed her a series of documents. I was shocked to hear the word that came out of Grace's mouth: divorce. Of all the scenarios my mind had created, that was the last one I expected. Grace wasn't cheating on me with another man. She was planning to divorce me and had been secretly meeting with a lawyer. The "it was amazing seeing you" had nothing to do with romance. It was her finalizing the details of a separation she had already decided on without even telling me. With a crushed heart, I quietly stepped away without being noticed. I left the cafe, got into my car, and sat there for a long time, processing everything I had just discovered. The silence between us, the frequent outings, the emotional distance, it all made sense now. She wasn't just trying to resolve what she had said about Logan that night. She was preparing to leave me. I returned home, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, but another part knew that if I did, our marriage would truly end right there. I stayed up all night thinking about what to do. If I let more time pass, she would probably serve me the divorce papers soon. I needed to act fast. But how? How could I save a marriage that already seemed doomed without even an honest conversation? After discovering that Grace was planning a divorce, I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Every thought, every memory of our relationship started to blend with a deep sense of guilt and regret. Even though I knew what she was doing, I decided not to confront her right away. I thought if she knew I had found out about the divorce, it would be the definitive end. So, I chose another path: to secretly try to save our marriage without Grace knowing I was aware of everything. I did everything I could to reignite the connection between us. I started cooking more, planning family outings, complimenting every little thing about her, hoping that, somehow, she would realize we could still be happy together. I bought flowers, planned small surprises, and even arranged a getaway for the two of us, thinking that maybe a break from routine would change her mind. However, despite all my efforts, Grace's response was always cold and distant. She accepted what I did, but without enthusiasm. Even so, I kept trying, convinced that it was my fault, that I had somehow failed as a husband. Weeks passed, and then, suddenly, Grace announced something I never expected. She was pregnant. The moment she said it, my heart stopped. On the one hand, I felt a wave of emotion and joy. I thought this could be the new beginning we needed, the chance to fix everything. I wanted to be a good father. I wanted our family to grow even more, and somehow I hoped that this new life coming would bring us together again. But Grace's reaction was nothing like what I had expected. She didn't seem happy. In fact, she looked visibly uncomfortable with the news, as if the pregnancy was more of a burden than a blessing. At that moment, all my insecurities came rushing back with full force. What was going on? Why wasn't Grace excited about the pregnancy? Was it my fault? Had everything that had happened up to that point, all my failures, made her life unbearable? I tried to push those thoughts away, but something didn't add up. Even with the pregnancy, Grace continued to act the same way. She still distanced herself, still had her meetings, and often went out alone. I was determined to do something special for her, to show that I was committed to our family. I wanted to surprise her at work, but for that, I needed to know the exact time she would be leaving. That night, I waited until Grace was sound asleep. I knew she always noted important commitments and schedules on her phone, so I decided to take her phone to check her calendar. But as I unlocked the phone, something else caught my attention. There was a recent conversation, and the name on the screen made my blood run cold. Logan, her ex. With my heart racing, I opened the conversation. The messages were recent, and what I read shattered any hope I had left. Grace had told Logan about the pregnancy, but the worst part was that she said the father of the baby was him, not me. The words on the screen seemed to scream in my mind. All my suspicions, all the signs I had ignored, were true. She had been cheating on me. The baby I was starting to love and imagine as part of our family wasn't mine. My hands trembled and my body went cold. I didn't know what to do, what to think. The person I had spent so many years with whom I had built a life, had been living a lie beside me. All the guilt I felt for our relationship falling apart, all the attempts to fix our marriage, it all seemed like a cruel joke. She had already betrayed me long ago, and I was the last to know. I closed the phone and went back to the bedroom, trying to control the avalanche of emotions. What would I do now? Confront Grace? Keep pretending I didn't know anything? Deep down, I knew our story had ended in that moment. And perhaps what hurt the most wasn't the fact that she was cheating on me, but that all this time, I had been fighting alone for something that was already dead. When I discovered the truth about Grace and Logan, it set off a wave of anger and resentment I didn't know I had. I was in a state of shock and, at the same time, furious. There was no room for doubts or uncertainties anymore. What I had read on her phone confirmed that all my efforts to save our marriage had been in vain. She had betrayed me in a way that was impossible to ignore. The next morning, I knew I couldn't continue living in that lie. My home, my refuge, was now tainted with betrayal and deceit. Without saying a word, I began packing some of her things, putting them into boxes. When Grace woke up and saw what I was doing, the shock on her face was palpable. She tried to argue, tried to convince me that I was making a mistake, but the rage I felt was overwhelming. "You're kicking me out?" she yelled, with a mix of disbelief and indignation. "Yes, Grace," I replied firmly. "This house is mine, and I will no longer tolerate your presence here. I've seen everything I needed to see." She tried to argue, saying I was being unfair and that I had no right to do this, but I showed her what I had found on her phone. The messages between her and Logan, confirming that he was the father of the baby, were the final blow. The shock on her face turned into an expression of desperation and defeat. With tears in her eyes and no more words left, she began gathering her things and preparing to leave. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought you still cared about me." "The old me was killed by you, Grace," I replied, my voice hardened by pain and anger. "The guy you knew and tried to manipulate is gone. What's left is someone who knows what he deserves and won't accept being deceived anymore." She left, still in shock, and I felt a bit lighter, but at the same time, a deep emptiness opened inside me. The house was finally silent, and I began to rebuild my life. Over time, the pain transformed into a sense of resolution and self-worth. I was determined to move forward, for myself and for the future of the child I was about to receive. A year passed, and I had adjusted to the new routine as a single father. The child had been born, and despite Grace's absence, I was finding happiness and strength in my role as a father. I had learned to find joy in the small things and to create a loving environment for my child. Then one night, the unexpected happened. The doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, I found Grace standing outside. She looked pale and exhausted, and her expression was one of desperation. "I need your help," she pleaded. "Logan has started using drugs again. He doesn't want to be involved with the child, and I don't know what to do. Please help me." I looked at her, unsure whether to feel compassion or stick to my decision. For a moment, I thought about all the broken promises, all the lies and betrayals. The anger and desire for revenge I felt hadn't completely disappeared. "The old me was killed by you, Grace," I said, my voice cold and firm. "The guy who was willing to help and forgive, he no longer exists. What you see now is someone who has learned to value himself and protect what is his. There is no room for you here anymore." She looked at me, unable to believe the words she was hearing. The desperation in her eyes was evident, but I knew I had to stick to my decision. I slowly closed the door, listening to her cries and pleas fade as she walked away. I felt a mix of sadness and satisfaction. I had made a difficult decision, but I knew it was what needed to be done to finally move forward. Life was changing, and I was determined to build a better future for myself and for the child, far from the shadows of the past.